Thanks for inviting me. So, Roger Geffen, Policy Director at Cycle UK. For those who don't know me, I will just do a little kind of roundup of things that are happening, and it's a bit miscellaneous. Let me start with a few things that I'm fear some of you will have heard me say before, so I'll say them briefly, but just to kind of do a bit of context setting. Starting from some kind of analysis of what were the kind of strategic priorities as I saw them a little earlier this year, and then bring them up to date into the sort of the utter confusion of the last couple of weeks. Because at the moment I really don't know where things are going, and I don't think anyone in government does either. But we'll come to that bit. Let's start by going back to when we were on the slightly firmer ground earlier in the year. So at that point, the way I was seeing the world was, and apologies for a bit of repeating things I've said for those of you who've heard this before. We'd made a whole load of progress. For all that the world had been, in a terrible state over the last 2 and a bit years in general, the world of cycling and walking policy in the UK had actually done really well out of the last couple of years. We got funding to the right ballpark, not yet the right level. You will be well aware that Cycling UK is still saying that the 2 billion we've got over 5 years, well, that's kind of annual average of 400 million. Still only about a quarter to a third of what is needed if the government wants to meet its own targets to double cycle use by 2025, which is looking harder and harder. And they've now got a new target to increase cycling and walking to half of all short urban journeys by 2030. And I won't sidetrack too much onto the uncertainties of what on earth that means and whether it's a really ambitious target or a worse than useless one. I think that they've now defined it in a way that makes it more worse than useless, but we've kind of got to get them off the hook, because otherwise that target is going to result in no money going to rural areas, and that's not in the interests of the DfT's own ministers. Anyway, we've got funding into the right ballpark, not yet the right level. We've got the cycling walking designs, cycling design standards in England, cycling walking design standards in Scotland and Wales, that mean that the money should in theory be well spent. We've got the highway code that means that in theory the rules now support local traffic engineers designing cycle tracks across the mouths of junctions in ways that give priority to cyclists, in ways that should enable good cycle tracks rather than worse than useless segregation that we've been historically used to in this country. So the highway code is beneficial, not just in terms of how it should affect driver behaviour, but also how cycle tracks get designed in junctions. And we've got Active Travel England to make sure that the cycle design standard, the money gets spent in accordance with those cycle design standards. And by that, I don't just mean cycle specific schemes or cycle and walking specific schemes. I mean, all traffic schemes should be spent with good cycling infrastructure in accordance with the cycling design standards we've now got. So all looking good at the national level with cycle and walking policy blinkers on. And those are two important caveats. So that takes us in, and those two caveats take us in two divergent directions as to what now needs sorting. There's firstly the fact that all we've got really is good national policy that needs to be implemented at the local level. And of course, there is a huge skill shortage in all 4 nations of the UK. Transport planners, traffic engineers who were never trained in how to design cycle-friendly or pedestrian-friendly infrastructure when they were at college, and now need some retraining. Of course, that too is something that Active Travel England is expecting to play a role in, but it's not going to happen quickly. So from a Cycling UK point of view, we're intending to strengthen our support for our cycle advocacy network, i.e. our network of local volunteers, to make sure that they can support or cajole or downright badger the more recalcitrant local authorities into actually doing what the government has told them that they need to do if they're going to get their funding. Now, I'll come back because there is another opportunity to twist their arms to do this right in terms of securing funding through the local transport plan process, but I'll come back to that bit. But the key point is one direction we have to go in is strengthening up local support to make sure that the fine words of national cycle walking policy get implemented at the local level, and that's a big challenge. Then the other direction I said is the other thing that the other limitation on the progress we've made is that I said all we've made is progress with our cycling walking policy blinkers on. So the other direction we've got to go in is to broaden out to all of the things that will otherwise hold us back, such as national political will to do traffic reduction, road safety, and the planning system. And those were the three directions that I was going to go in, and my colleague Duncan Dollable was going to focus particularly on strengthening the local support for local campaigning. Then, with those three things in mind, traffic reduction, road safety and planning, along came another job opportunity to work on the first of those, namely traffic reduction. So as some of you will have gathered, I'm now actually working my Cycling UK role only part-time, alongside a part-time role with the Transport Action Network, jointly coordinating with a job share partner, coordinating a low traffic future alliance, where we're aiming to build a really broad, very diverse alliance of individuals and organizations to build up kind of and demonstrate the public and political support that is already there, but we need to strengthen it. But we need mainly we need to demonstrate the support that's already there for a low traffic future. And there, as I say, we need to do that at the national and the local level. And there are hooks for both of those things. So the national hook, timing uncertain, but the national hook is the opportunity to press for national road traffic reduction targets at whatever point the transport bill comes along. Now, the transport bill was supposed to have already come out by now, but with the government having, well, the previous government had unveiled a Queen's speech back in when there was a Queen back in May that had 38 bills. The normal annual average is about 22 bills. So there was always a risk that the transport bill might get delayed. And sure enough, that is happening. We're being told that it's not now going to come out till April at the earliest. But there was also a report in the newspaper earlier today, the Grand Chapter's rail reforms, which are the main element of that transport bill, might get canned altogether. So who knows when this transport bill is going to happen? From a cycling walking perspective, there are all sorts of aspects to it, but the one that's most relevant to the traffic reduction bit is the opportunity to say there's already some existing legislation called the Road Traffic Reduction Act that requires the Secretary of State to consider setting road traffic reduction targets, taking account of everything that the Secretary of State ought to take account of when thinking about road traffic reduction targets: climate change, air pollution, congestion, road danger, physical inactivity, social inequality. They're all in the legislation as criteria that the Secretary of State should be bearing in mind when setting traffic reduction targets. The one flaw in this piece of legislation is it only requires the Secretary of State to consider doing these things, quote, at such time as he deems appropriate. If we can use the new transport bill when it comes through to press for those words to be replaced by, say, every 2 years, then the Secretary of State would need to have a real rethink about this idea that all we need to do is switch to electric vehicles and the world will be fine, which is where Grand Chaps have got to. Instead, he or now she would need to set road traffic reduction targets, taking account of the advice of the Committee on Climate Change, the air quality targets, and so on, which would be very, very powerful. So the aim, one of the key aims of the Low Traffic Future Alliance is to build an alliance of all sorts of organisations, environmental groups, air quality groups, road safety groups, progressive local authorities, green businesses, you name it. We're welcoming all comers who are up for being part of a concerted push to demonstrate and mobilise support for traffic reduction at the national level through the mechanism of pressing for a legislative requirement to set traffic reduction targets. Then we come to the local bit. How do we get local traffic reduction? This is the local transport plan process, is the opportunity here, and I mentioned it earlier. So the government said about a year ago that they were going to revive local transport plans. Local transport plans were actually invented about a little over 20 years ago when John Prescott was Transport Secretary, for those of you who are old enough to remember him, when he was committed to trying to achieve traffic reduction and failed, but not for want of trying. Part of what he was trying to do was to he basically cut a deal with the local authorities that said that instead of just giving them 1 year's transport funding at a time, they were going to get 5 years of transport funding in return for writing a strategy document that set out how they were going to make the world a better place from transport terms, reduce traffic ultimately. The local transport plan system kind of ran for 2 5-year periods that took us up to when the coalition government came in 2010. And then the coalition government sort of said, that's a terrible burden on local authorities to have to write these local transport plans. And it has not, since then, it has not updated the statutory guidance that local authorities are supposed to follow when writing their local transport plans. So most of them haven't been doing it, even though there's a legal requirement for them to have a local transport plan. Thank goodness the government has now gone back to reviving local transport plans, because it's a very good thing for local authorities to have funding certainty, to know where their funding is coming from, rather than having to jump through hoops to get little bits of funding from the Housing Infrastructure Fund, a Future High Streets Fund, goodness knows, lots of pots of funding that come and go. They too would just like to have their funding come from one place in return for writing a good strategy document. The government has finally come around to agreeing, which is actually very good news. And the really good news is that these are things that the government has said must be included in local transport plans. They are a cycling walking network plan, so an LSWIP effectively, a bus service improvement plan, an electric vehicle charging plan. We're not quite so interested in that bit, but it is part of the wider thing. We do need electric vehicles. We just need fewer vehicles as well as newer vehicles. And the really important bit of the local transport plan process is quantified carbon reduction targets. They couldn't quite get, the DFT officials couldn't quite get their grant chats to say traffic reduction targets, but they got him to agree to quantified carbon reduction targets. So they did pretty well. And this is a real opportunity for local transport campaigning. So with my Transport Action Network hat on, as part of the sort of low traffic future alliance, we're aiming to organise a series of roadshow events, kind of probably 5 around the country, say Bristol, London, Birmingham, Manchester, York, and invite anybody with interest in less traffic, whether they be cycle pedestrian campaigners, bus campaigners, Save the Local Park campaigners, air quality campaigners, road safety campaigners, come and learn about the local transport plan process, learn about the opportunity it creates, and work together across all of those different interests in a low traffic future. How can we all work together to make sure we get some really good quantified carbon reduction targets? And incidentally, there's also a research project going on to help inform what levels of traffic reduction and what increases in cycling and in walking and in buses and so on correlate with the traffic reduction we need to be on course for net zero. So that's all going on, as it were. That's the traffic reduction bit, which I took out of Cycling UK and am now doing with my Transport Action Network hat on. Then we come to the other 2 biggies, road safety and planning. Now, road safety, there's a mishmash of things that the government has been promising to do and failing to do. The main overarching one is a road safety strategic framework. It's late. As part of that, they're supposed to be producing their road policing strategy, which they consulted on 2 years ago and still haven't produced the kind of report on the consultation process to say what are they going to do to strengthen roads policing. So that's also late. They also promised late last year, well, re-promised to review road traffic offences and penalties, having promised in 2014. So that's kind of now 8 years late. And also, as part of this transport bill, as and when it comes through, we're also expecting them to produce some legislation around autonomous vehicles and indeed micromobility vehicles, including e-scooters. So the transport bill, when it comes through, is going to include a lot of stuff. And I should also have said that, assuming it does still include the rail reforms, it's also a potential opportunity to press for better sort of arrangements for carrying cycles, for combining cycling and rail travel. So better spaces on new and refurbished rolling stock, better cycle reservation systems and all the rest of it. So there are a lot of things, some of which are traffic reduction, some of which are cycle rail integration, some of which are road safety, in all encompassed in the transport bill. But the headline campaign is going to be the traffic reduction stuff. Okay, but it's also going to include a bunch of road safety things. And then there's some other road safety things which are not going to have legislative, that are just going to be policy. So quite a lot of things going on there. The last of my 3 big headings is planning. And this is probably, of all the many policy uncertainties at the moment, this is probably the one that's messiest, quite frankly. Just going back again a bit, 2 years ago, when Robert Jenrick was planning secretary. He announced some planning reforms, which would have basically been thoroughly anti-democratic, very bad news for the environment, very bad news for Conservative MPs of all different shades. It basically said we need to build more housing, and we most need to build housing in the places where there's a big gap between local house prices and local wages. Places like Surrey, where the house prices are not constrained by people's ability to afford houses, because they mostly work in the city or they've retired. So the idea of trying to bring down house prices in Surrey by building more houses in leafy Surrey went down very badly with all the backbenchers of Surrey and other leafy parts of the country. But they also went down very badly with all the Red Wall Tories who were saying, what's this going to do to regenerate my Red Wall constituency? So Jenrick lost his job, and the government lost a by-election in Chesham and Amersham, because this is one of the main factors in that by-election defeat. So in came Michael Gove to sort out the mess left by Jenrick. Then he got booted out by Liz Truss, and we've now got Simon Clarke as community secretary, who seems to be going back to where Jenrick left off. In other words, picking battles not just with the environment movement, with the housing movement, but also with the Conservatives' own backbenchers. So the Better Planning Coalition, that brings together a whole raft of organisations, it includes us, Cycling UK, Sustrans Living Streets, doing some sustainable transport things, but it also includes the Green Building Council. You can guess what they're looking for out of the planning system. Shelter, looking for more affordable and social housing out of the planning system. We're all trying to say that the planning system needs to be moving in a direction that's good for people and the planet, and not have the planning rules torn up to allow a complete developer's charter, which is where Jenrick started off and where Simon Clarke seems to now be picking up. So the Better Planning Coalition is now having to kind of dig its heels in, rather than work more productively with Michael Gove, which is where we thought we were only a couple of months ago. So ultimately, my hunch is, and this is a personal view now, my hunch is that Liz Truss's aspirations to revive road building, fracking, tear up planning rules, tear up environmental protections, all of this stuff is ultimately doomed to fail. Just as Donald Trump's attempt to revive the coal industry were doomed to fail. The problem is the amount of time and effort that it's going to require from the environmental movement and other progressive movements to stop her dead in her tracks, when we really ought to be working together to move things forward. And ultimately, I think we will win. It's just a matter of how much effort is it going to take in the meantime. So that's my kind of overall read on the current state of play. Sorry, I haven't dived into detail, but I think you were already covering things like the active travel England settlement. So, you know, we can pick those up in questions if we need to. But I'll leave it there for now.
So thanks very much. My name is Karen G, and I founded the Cycle Sprog website 10 years ago. And I'd always cycled. Cycle is how I got around all my local journeys. And then I suddenly had a baby 16 years ago. Well, not suddenly, I knew I was going to have a baby, but I had a baby 16 years ago, and suddenly I was unable to cycle. I didn't know that you could cycle with babies or young children, and my world sort of narrowed down a lot because I was having to walk instead of cycle. And I just thought that was how life had to be. And then one day, a friend that I'd made said that she'd bought this bike seat for her baby. And I was like, wow, my life has just got immeasurably better here. I had to go out and buy one straight away. And suddenly I was able to start cycling my child again. And I was the only person, I lived in Chester at the time, and I was the only person cycling around my neighbourhood with a young child. So it was quite a lonely existence. And then, as is the want when you have children, I decided to have another one. And suddenly it was bad enough trying to cycle with one child. There was no way I could possibly cycle with two children. So I went back to walking everywhere and driving more than I would like to with my two children. And sort of this was 14 years ago, and there was just no information about cycling with children at all, or the very small amounts I managed to find were deep inside technical forums and very, very kind of technically orientated, certainly not written for busy mums like me who just wanted to cycle with my child. But after about 18 months of having my second child, I discovered trailers. So we actually had two trailers. We wore the first one out. And again, I was the only person cycling around my neighborhood with a trailer. And these are two random stock photos of trailers because I didn't know sort of 14 years later I would be talking to people about cycling with kids. But that was kind of how my life was progressing. And then it's really difficult cycling with kids, and they kept growing. This is a problem with children. So one of the things that does annoy me is when people say, oh, we need to get more parents to cycle the school run. It's actually really difficult to cycle the school run. It's expensive and there's just lots of kit involved. And if there's no advice and no role models for you, it's almost impossible. But I kept ploughing on, finding different ways of doing it, seats, tag-alongs, trailgaters, the works. And then one day, it was about 11 years ago. It was September, October time, 2011. And the left-hand picture there is my little one. And he moved out of the trailer at the beginning of the summer, and we'd had a lovely summer riding around with him in the front bike seat. And it suddenly struck me that we were approaching winter and those lovely little fingers were going to get really cold. And so I was Googling how to keep his fingers warm on the bike. And I couldn't find anything at all. And I turned to my husband in frustration. I said, you know what, there really needs to be a website about this. I'm absolutely fed up. Somebody needs to write something about how you cycle with kids. And he turned to me and said, well, why don't you do it? And I went, well, because I know I've seen nothing about cycling with kids. I work full time and I've got 2 children under the age of 5. What a stupid idea. And then fast forward 6 months and I'm launching a website called Cycle Sprog. And it started out just as a little blog about what I was doing. You can see from the left-hand photo, we managed to find some gloves for him. And I just basically documented what I was doing and the things I was learning. It sort of found its own little community and people were actually interested in what I was writing, and we started getting sent things to review. So it accidentally became a bit of a review site. We got sent this little windshield to keep him dry in the wet. We got sent a follow me tandem to pull him along behind us. And he's riding an Isla bike there. And all these things were sort of just starting in the environment in the UK. Isla bikes is exactly the same age as my eldest son. So it's quite a new concept having quality kids bikes at the time. And then I assumed it would all finish. I'd write about my time and then he would start riding a bike and that would be it. But then shortly after we launched the website, Frog Bikes launched, and they got in touch with me and said, would you like to review a bike? So suddenly we became bike reviewers. We started writing about the bikes the kids were riding. And about that time, it was the same time my friends and my sort of associates and colleagues of a similar age were all having their kids starting to ride bikes. And I kept getting told, Karen, it's all right for you. Your kids love riding bikes. I can't get my child to ride a bike. I bought them a bike for Christmas. They hate it. I'm never getting another bike for them, which broke my heart. I was like, why are these kids not enjoying riding a bike? And then I started to learn that there was a common denominator on this. And it was that parents were buying really cheap rubbish bikes for their children. There was a race to the bottom in terms of quality at the time, and a lot of the more sort of established bike brands were being taken over by venture capitalists, and quality was declining a lot. So there was a real disparity between what my children were riding and what a lot of other people's children were riding. So it became a bit of a mission to review bikes and get the word out there about the quality kids bikes. So my kids had a great time riding all the best kids bikes that were out there. We kept getting sent them, and we rode bikes, mountain bikes, hybrids, all that sort of thing. Top right hand picture shows the fact that I had to start recruiting other people to review the smaller bikes because my kids were getting too big. And then we started to get bike brands get in touch with us and say, can we work with you? Can you do a bit of publicity? And it was kind of getting quite out of control, really, in terms of what I was having to do. Hadn't realized how much market was there. I felt very strongly, I had 2 boys, but I started to feel very strongly, there's not enough representation of girls riding bikes. I did some work. This is an example of how the community all sort of rallied around and shared their experiences as well, which enabled me to write more about getting more girls on bikes. And then I went on holiday to the Netherlands in 2016, as probably lots of people on this call have, and it just opened my eyes, and it was just like, oh my goodness, this is what things could be like. You know, my son was 9, almost 10, and he was able to ride around for the entire holiday. And you know, when I came back, I was kind of like, my goodness me, we've got to do something about this. So that's when I stood up a little bit in my local area, which is Kendal, and started doing a little bit of campaigning, and also trying to write and tell my audience what good looks like, because I think it's really important that people understand what the art of the possible is and what we're not getting here. If you don't understand that, then you can't aspire to it. So all this was very niche. Nobody in the UK at the time, though, back in 2016, was really that interested outside of a very small number of urban areas about cargo bikes and cycling with kids for active travel. But you know, I've had that vision in my head. And over time, this is sort of a graph of what our growth looked like. We started off in 2012 on the left-hand side with sort of just my mum reading what I was writing. And over the time, this is the graph of what it looked like through to the start of the COVID pandemic. You know, we were just growing little bit by little bit. Each year I would do a project. I was a freelance project manager, so I would do a 9-month project, a year's project, save half my money and then take some time off, and then live off of that while I worked on the website. So that's why it sort of goes up in sort of steps. And then it sort of got to the point where, is this a hobby or is this a career? It's just taking up all of my time, and I'm starting to make a little bit of money from it. So we decided that in April 2020 I was going to go sort of full-time on Cycle Sprog. There's not much money in cycling, but we thought we could make it work. Just so you know, we make our money from affiliate links. So I have relationships with most of the quality brands. If they make a sale through our website, we get a commission. We've got ads on the page like most websites. And we also have got more into helping bike brands access our audience in terms of marketing their new ranges and things like that. So I was like, right, okay, I think we can do this. It's worth a try. And then COVID happened, and that's what the COVID effect looks like. All of my nice growth before looks like nothing when suddenly you're told the only thing you can do is go outside for an hour and ride a bike with your child. So there's huge potential there. Unfortunately for me, I caught COVID right at the start of the epidemic and got long COVID. So I was literally out for a long portion. So I wasn't able to capitalize on that, but the website just kept going, and you can see it just held its own and kept going, and there's you know, a real interest in that. Thankfully I'm better now, and now I'm sort of back in it. Things have changed a lot. So previously parents were really interested in cycling off-road with their children, holidays, weekends, leisure cycling, and that has really changed now, and people are really interested in how they can transport their families around day to day, obviously safely, but we're seeing a huge interest now in that sort of active travel aspect of things. You may have seen, those of you who read Bike Biz, you may see that we've grown recently, and I've taken on my first full-time permanent member of staff. I had a team of freelancers before, but she's on the call today. Saskia Helchis has joined as our content editor. You probably know her as Bicycle Mayor of Bath and leading light in Kidical Mass, but she is now also Cycle Sprog. So that's absolutely wonderful for us, and is going to mean that we can create a whole load more content to help people. Advice content, reviews, you know, how-tos, that sort of thing. And we've got a number of challenges and opportunities that we're now facing into, sort of in trying to help more families get cycling. Our current, you know, our ongoing one of trying to make sure that people buy decent quality bikes rather than these things that fall apart after 2 rides continues. And that is sort of going to potentially be affected by the cost of living crisis. Families are really struggling, so will they invest in bikes for their children? So we need to sort of really show people how cycling, you know, really benefits their children, and it's a great hobby and a great way of transport, etc. And the cost of living crisis also presents an opportunity, in as much as if you do have bicycles, then you can cycle the school run and you don't have to pay for the fuel. We also need to take people from, there's a lot of people out there who are just sort of curious, how can they cycle to school, and providing them with the information and the advice and the confidence to go from just being curious to actually having the confidence to go out there and ride the school run is actually, you know, it's quite difficult. And loads of people, I mean, people always say to me, oh, you're so brave, you're so brave. I mean, it shouldn't be like that. But in a lot of parts of the country, you know, that is how it still is. We don't all live in areas with low traffic neighbourhoods, etc. So giving people that confidence on how to do it. The amount of different ways to do it is constantly increasing, so it gets more and more complicated with the more and more options, so helping people navigate what is the best solution for their family. We need to do that, and we layer it all onto the challenge that obviously has been talked about, about the current, you know, state of the politics, and you know, are we ever going to see school streets and the low traffic neighbourhoods that enable people to cycle to school? So that's basically who we are, what we do, how it's happened, and what we're looking to do. You can find us at cyclesprog.co.uk. That's the website. It would be absolutely great if you could sort of connect with us on social. We're at Cycle Sprog across the main platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. And if in your various communities and groups you have parents who want to cycle and maybe you've got questions and struggling and that sort of thing, do tell them about us and share our articles and stuff. Me personally, I'm on Twitter as KarenG3, and I do campaigning in the Kendal area, which is where I live. And Saskia is on Instagram and Twitter as at Saskia Halechis, if you want to connect with us. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak, and questions.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, if you pop your slides down, that's we can. I'll kick us off if it's okay, and ask if you might not be able to pick one thing, but like if you had to characterize, perhaps for people who don't have kids like myself, like if you had to characterize what's the one thing that, if you were viewing the needs of a family as opposed to just adults, what's the sort of thing that what's the thing that your kids would say, what's the thing that you've seen families need and enjoy that's different to just the kind of adult designed network?
You can't be brave when you've got kids. Yeah, so you're putting the most precious thing in the world to you on a bike. You don't take risks, you can't take risks. So you need the infrastructure to be designed that it's safe. It's a, you know, a no-brainer really. And you know, one of the things I'm really keen on is, you know, asking people to go for rides with a family member. If they're designing the infrastructure, because if you're not comfortable riding with your niece or your friend's child or your grandchild or whatever it is, then you shouldn't be expecting people to ride on it.
Brilliantly answered, thank you. So yes, do have questions or points or observations or discussion topics you'd like to raise now, and Ruth, over to you.
Karen, that was awesome. I just want to show this because I wear this everywhere and often get compliments and comments about it. So I advise everyone to print it off. And thanks, Tim, for finding it for me to do. But that was brilliant, Karen. One of the noticeable things in Holland is that children's bikes are generally mini versions of the mum's bike. So kids often ride on bikes with pannier racks, with upright handlebars and with those crates on the front. They're not on all these different kind of wazzy bikes that people seem to think they need here. And also there is a real problem for children in this country with their backs, because in my day, and I'm from Chester, I didn't know you were, we had desks where we put all our books, and now the children have to carry everything on their back. Well, if you've got a pannier rack, you put it on the pannier rack. So I really, really urge anyone with children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, always make sure you've got mudguards and pannier racks, and don't try and get some kind of upmarket mountain bike for the school run. And I think that's partly what you might say as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Ruth. And interestingly, in the past year, 2 of the big kids bike brands, Woom and Frog, have released city bikes or urban bikes, depending on how they brand them. And disappointingly, both of them decided to launch them in Europe first. And not here in the UK, which was really, really annoying. But they've both now launched, they both launched within 2 weeks of each other in August. So we now do have access to those bikes here in the UK.
Any other talking points people would like to raise? Otherwise, I've got a question for Saskia. Tim.
Mute. Thank you very much, Karen, and brilliant site. I can't afford the bikes, but they're brilliant site. My recommendation to everybody is, if you have got grandchildren or children, is aluminium outweighs iron and steel for bikes, and start with balance bikes as well. Don't do any, so start much younger. 18 months, 2 years. Those sort of flip around trikes that Tesco's used to sell for 20 quid, which turn into single 2-wheelers, have worked brilliantly with my 9-year-old as he is now. And balance is what you need to ride a bike, and that's what it teaches you. And the first time I saw one, I heard this wooden thing rattling down the hill towards me, and a 2-year-old shot past me around the corner, and I just thought, I want one of those. So I couldn't wait for grandchildren to ride. But I think that's the future, is starting kids on balance bikes. And if I had my way, that's where we'd be investing our money. Yeah, more power to you, Abba. And I particularly like, as you know, the Ukraine motifs that you produced so quickly. They were brilliant, and I ride around with those on and get pleasant remarks as well. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Just for everyone else who doesn't know that, yeah, I made some sticker things, posters for Fight Putin, Ride a Bike. I'll put those back on our homepage, actually, so anybody who wants to go and download those can do that.
And Karen, what's your take on the balance bike point?
Oh, I absolutely, totally agree with Tim. Yes, they are a really great way of learning the skills that you need, because when you're learning to ride a bike, cognitively, you need to be able to do lots of things. You need to be able to balance, you need to be able to steer, you need to be able to go at speed, you need to be able to stop, and then you need to be able to pedal. So a balance bike will take you almost all the way, and then when you're ready to pedal, that's all you need to be concentrating on. When you put stabilizers on a 2-wheeler, you're turning it into a trike, and you're changing the way that it corners, the way that it handles and everything. So then when you take the stabilizers away, it's no surprise that the child topples over. Absolutely, they are a really great innovation, and the balance bike market has actually become really competitive. Tim mentioned the prices of some of these things. Well, balance bikes, you can now pay anything up to a good couple of £100 on a balance bike, or you can buy one for 20 quid. So there's the whole range, and what we try and do is make sure that if somebody is buying a balance bike, they are buying one that's actually sort of fit for purpose, because some of the really cheap ones are balance bikes, not so much, but the kids bikes, some of the really cheap ones are absolutely horrendous and are not actually safe to ride. There's actually no standards on kids bikes, which is interesting.
Ooh, that's interesting. I've got 2 people wanting to come in. Sylvia, is your point about balance bikes or not? Otherwise, no. I'll go to Dave then. We got you on mute, Dave.
Right, as a parent with 2 children, actually 48 years younger than me, I started late, but I got hold of 2 really cheap fairy cycles and ripped the stabilizers off and created balance bikes. So my pair were scooting around from 2 years upwards on their balance bikes. And it was very much the CBA method, which I've been promoting with Carlton. Control, balance, action. First of all, even off the bike, you get them to wheel the bike around, work out how the brakes work, how the steering works. Then you get them to scoot it. Then you get them to scoot and glide for a slightly downhill piece of flat tarmac or something like that. Then once they've got scoot and glide perfected, you start doing quarter turn on the pedals, because that's how I learned. I got the scoot, I got the glide, and then chain back on, but not try a full rotation of the pedals. Just rock the pedals a quarter turn to keep the bike moving. And very soon you get more confident that you actually rotate the pedals. And hey presto, you're riding. And the big danger with stabilizer bikes is that kids jump on them and they can pedal fast before they even learn how to stop and steer. And with a bike with stabilizers, it is the stability of a tricycle. You turn the wheel sharply and you get thrown over the handlebars and you put yourself face down into the ground.
So another vote for balance bikes. And
and
stabilizers.
Our balance bikes cost 10 quid at the bike station. You just pick up a cheap bike and rip the stabilizers off.
Thanks, Dave. Karen, do you want to say anything now, or
no? Totally agree. Yeah.
Sylvia.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to say hello, Karen. Lovely to see you here.
Hi, Sylvia.
Yeah, I cannot recommend enough this website, because whenever you look for a trailer or for any kind of options to cycle with your children, Karen would have reviewed it, and there's quite a lot of information. And I just wanted to say that family cycling is really important, because it is when you have a family, it's one of those life stages change that you can have either way. Either you are given or provided with information that you need, or you will end up buying a car, because this is one of those stages where if you don't have a car until now, you might probably buy one because you think there's nothing else. So it's really, really extremely important to provide families with all information that they need at that stage.
Thank you, Sylvia. If that hasn't inspired us, Saskia, I don't know what will. We need to we were talking about this earlier, how we need to really provide the real entry level information so that people who are at that point of trying to find out and make those decisions, they've got all that information and they can start at a high level and then go deep. So thank you, Sylvia. That's really good.
Yeah, that was going to be my question for both of you, but Saskia and her new job maybe as well. You know, what do you see as the content priorities? You know, what do you think's changed during COVID that you're like, yeah, can't wait to write about this or that?
Shall I jump in here, Karen?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's cargo bikes, or at least, yeah, if you can. I'm not sure if a long tail is actually a cargo bike. I think in the Netherlands, a lot of bikes are used as cargo bikes. They're just very normal bikes. But yeah, a bike which you can use to carry more than one child on. I think that's definitely the future, and we see more and more of them. Depending on where you are, the type might change. So here in Bath, we see mostly long tails. But if you're somewhere where it's a bit more flat, then you might see a lot of box bikes. But yeah, that's definitely the future. And there's a couple of cheaper options coming on the market now, so we're keeping an eye on those because those are particularly interesting.
And can I ask, is your sort of business model, if you like, Karen, is it effectively advertising on the site, or how does the funding work for the website?
Yeah, so it's affiliate income. So that's where if somebody buys some of the bikes, not all of the bikes, but some of the bikes, will get a commission for the sale. It is on-site advertising as well. I added that a couple of years ago, but this is harking back to the British cycling thing. Yeah, I exclude loads of categories. So I won't have cars, I won't have this, I won't have that advertised on my site. So I don't make as much as I could do, but you know, you have to do these things. It's a no-brainer. And then we run how it's developing now, which is how I never foresaw it happening, is I have relationships with most of the bigger brands, and they come to me and say, oh, you know, can we access your audience? So we would maybe run an advertising campaign for them or write some sponsored content, which was an interesting development that I didn't see coming.
I think that means you're called an influencer, Karen.
Yeah, but I don't tell people what I have for breakfast. So I like to think I'm a key person of influence rather than an influencer.
Yeah, and if someone in this call, perhaps, you know, I mean, what you've done is create great content around a sort of, not a niche, because most people are in a family, but, you know, a sort of niche. If someone had an idea for a similar type of, you know, proposition in terms of a website around a different niche, what would be your tips, kind of what you know now, if they wanted to start out creating a website for a kind of special interest?
Oh, Oh gosh, that's a whole nother topic. But yes, the best piece of advice I was told was Google knows if you love your website. So if you're writing about something you're really passionate about, that will come across, and Google always has the aim of putting the best content at the top. So I just write good content and I'm passionate about it, and therefore eventually, you know, Google gets it to the top. I once had somebody ask me the same question because they wanted to set up a website about tattoo removal. And they were going to make millions of pounds out of this website they were going to set up about tattoo removal. And when I asked them, they were like, oh yes, and it's going to be tattoo removal for women, but they were a man. And then I said to them, have you got a tattoo? And they were like, no. So I was like, right, well, how are you going to write about tattoo removal? You know, so don't chase the money, chase your passion, and it will eventually work. Cycling has not as much money in it, but you know, if I picked a different niche, I might have made more money out of it. But yes, it's
well, thank you. That's quite heartwarming to think that if you really do care about something, that there probably will be some sort of money in it, and heartwarming also that you choose not to take advertising from fossil fuel giants, which if you can do it, I don't see why British cycling can't. We'll perhaps, if anyone else has got a question, dive in. But we talked last week, Karen, about school streets, and I just wondered, has Cycle Sprog got involved in the kind of school streets campaign? Could you know, seeing families advocate for these kinds of measures is really good. What's your take on that?
Yeah, no, I think school streets was such a good idea. What we try and do on social is kind of share different campaigns and stuff. I mean, because obviously there's different ones all over the country. Personally, I live in Cumbria, and in Kendal we haven't got any school streets yet, and we really struggled. I did a lot of work on the LC Whip with the local council, and if you look at our LC Whip, it doesn't go, there isn't a route going anywhere near a school unless it's just an accident of geography that happens to pass by. So it's very, very frustrating. And we do see a massive difference between what's happening in the areas that are getting the interventions, and you know, it absolutely is wonderful for me to look on Facebook and see all these families now able to cycle, and the growth in the cargo bikes in those areas. And then I look around here where I live, and it's sort of equally heartbreaking that it's never going to really happen here because we just don't have the political will.
On that topic, well, maybe on that topic, I'll ask Ruth to give us the last question, and then we'll finish for this week.
Thank you. Just amazing, Karen. As you know, I'm in awe. But I just wanted to do a shout out, which I have done quite a few weeks, for Family Bicycle on Facebook and also Family Bicycle on Twitter. And even, you know, my son's now 31 and works in the cycle industry. It's so heartwarming to read the really wonderful stories of people up and down the country when we're all mired in the depression of things not happening. And then you do read about a woman who's got a disabled child on the front somewhere in the Lake District, and she's got another child alongside, and she's doing it. It just is a breath of fresh air. And I would recommend to everyone, no matter with children, not with children, to watch it. And Karen, it's lovely to see you at last, and very nice to see you, Saskia, too.
It's the Family Cycling UK Facebook group.
Oh yes, sorry.
I would really recommend, and it's Bikes and, is it Saskia, Bikes and Babies?
Well, Bikes and Babies is Ruth and Queen's own, but there's also Family Bicycle on Twitter. Yeah,
that's the guy who does the long distance cycling with his kids as well. It's really inspirational. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for putting me right, and lovely to see you all. And I think we've got another spectacular next week, haven't we?